Good afternoon. I was working for a client. The client was a shipping company, and one day they invited me to sit in on a meeting. They said, "Mike, would you like to sit in on this meeting? It's all about trans-border shipping security." And I thought, "Oh, that sounds neat. I've never worked in border security, so yeah, why not? I can just watch some neat stuff happening, right?" So I walked into the room, and in this big room, they started introductions. They started on one side, and they said they had people from Washington, the Border Security Services people in Washington, and they went and they had the Border Security Services people from Ottawa, and then they had a whole bunch of rail people and trucking people and airline people. I thought, oh, this is really interesting. And they got around eventually to me, and before I stood up to introduce myself, my client said to me, no, Mike, I will introduce you. And he stood up, and he said, "This is Mike. He's going to be leading us through all our project planning now." So I was surprised for a moment. Then I thought to myself, wait a minute. A project is a project, right? Whether it's construction or border security or nuclear power or IT, project's a project, right? Sure. So general project management is agnostic. That is, it doesn't matter what sector, domain, industry you're in. Good project management practices are generally good project management practices. But it's important that the project management team figures out what is appropriate, what approach is appropriate, how much project management, what level of detail do we go into in any particular project. I had a project manager approach me and he said, "Mike, how can I take my project management into another sector, another area that I've never worked in before?" I said, "Well, maybe there's a few things you should know first. Things like, are you familiar with all the steps of the development life cycle? Do you have a good handle on the terminology? Anybody in IT recognize all those acronyms for a million different kinds of tests? Only if BAT could be, what's BAT stand for? Business acceptance test? How about basic acceptance test? Bench acceptance test? Whatever organization you're in, you better make sure you know what they are saying these acronyms mean. Oh yeah, and TLA, that was buried, there's a bad joke buried in the back of the acronym definition book. Yeah, TLA is the three-letter acronym for three-letter acronyms. What I said to my colleague was, a project manager needs to know what questions to ask. Needs to have enough information to be able to ask the right questions. Ask the questions that validate the data they're getting and unearth all the risks that the project's being exposed to. And if you don't have enough experience to know all these things, maybe surround yourself with some people who are subject matter experts and some people who you can trust. So today, we're going to look at several of the factors that differentiate different types of projects. And I'm going to use some extreme types of projects. We'll look at the construction side. There's a production facility I was involved in a few years ago. And we're going to look at IT projects. There's the Toronto Stock Exchange I was involved in when they moved from floor trading to electronic trading, so a technology project. So we're going to use those as illustrations of factors that differentiate projects. We're going to start by looking at the scope of projects, and then I like to use the risk breakdown structure as a framework to understand some of the different challenges that are different between construction projects versus IT projects. In construction projects, it's pretty easy to understand what somebody is going to be building. There's the original drawing of the parking garage expansion project at St. Joseph's Health Center, and there's the final product. They look the same to me. If somebody showed me the picture, I knew what I was getting. Information technology projects, kind of different. They're more about producing something that will facilitate activities or make a business process improved or moving data around. They're all intangible, so it becomes a whole lot harder to describe to all your stakeholders what the scope of the project is. In construction projects, continue on in scope, construction projects usually have some similarity to previous projects. Information technology projects, there's a good chance that this will be the first time this kind of project's being done in this organization. Bringing technology and people together in a way they never have been brought together before. Could be a new project in this organization, could be a new project anywhere at all, never been done before. And that has a lot to do with how quickly technology is changing in the IT industry. I was looking at some information about what has changed in IT. Do you know that in the last 12 years ago, we had no flash memory, we had no Android, we had no Chrome browser, we had no iPads. And the app economy didn't exist. That's all the economy associated with mobile applications, which by some estimates this year is going to be worth $3 trillion. Didn't exist 12 years ago. The risk breakdown structure is a nice framework to understand the challenges on any particular project. So this is a risk breakdown structure for a property development project. It goes into a whole lot more detail if I were to click into the little plus signs. But let's start with the land and the natural environment. On a construction project, we're talking about the geotechnical conditions, the hydrological conditions, the flora and the fauna. We're talking about the weather. And I even worked with one client, a Crown Corporation. They kept an archaeologist on site because they knew they had ancient sites of human activity. So I didn't have a photograph of their burial mound, but this burial mound here is down the road from my great-grandfather's house. And according to oral tradition, my ancestors from 3,000 years ago are buried there. If we were talking about an IT environment, we're not talking, legacy is different in an IT environment, right? Legacy, we're talking about fitting our new system into the network, into the existing architecture, into the existing hardware, being able to communicate and migrate information from various databases and softwares. So a whole lot different, totally different animals. Let's take a look at another one. I had a project manager come up to me and he said, Mike, this project would be a whole lot easier to run if I didn't have to deal with people. right?
Always.
Yeah. Okay, but those people are our customers, those people are our stakeholders, those people are our project team. So, yeah, sure, there's a lot of challenges there. So let's look at project team. If you're looking at a construction project, that production facility I showed you earlier, that had a team size of about 500 workers building it. And a typical information technology project like that TSX project, we're talking an order of magnitude smaller, 50, 60 developers on a project like that. On a construction project, we've got construction labor groups, the unions, constraining what people can do. We've got contracts constraining what people are allowed to do. We've got all kinds of regulated certifications constraining what people are allowed to do. In IT, yeah, there's specialists, but we don't have the same kind of constraints. And I saw an estimate. They said there's probably 6 times more unionized construction workers than there are IT workers. Very different. So, yeah, maybe, project's a project. Construction, IT, are they the same? They got different challenges. Resource availability. In the construction industry, we have seasonal and industry cycles. So that some years we have all the resources we want, some years we don't have the resources we want. We have the summer season where construction is happening. There'd be a shortage of outdoor workers in the summer season. In information technology, yeah, there's a shortage of workers, but that shortage of workers is generally in all the new IT skills. So we have to work around different challenges in availability of resources. And we also find that in IT projects, generally there's more resource-loaded schedules, although there's a trend towards more resource-loaded schedules in the construction world now, as people suddenly are realizing that maybe all resources are not unlimited and all resources are not interchangeable. The construction site is one physical location. In IT projects, your team may be broadly dispersed. I worked with a team. The implementation project manager was in California. The software development manager was in Norway. The development team was in St. Petersburg, Russia. And of course, the location that the client sat was in Oakville. In IT projects, there's a good chance that the IT project is going to happen along with some change to business processes. Because there's these changes to business processes, there's going to be resistance to change. So the organizational change management is a big deal on IT projects. And the role of the business analyst is something we don't see in construction projects. The business analyst is there to bridge the gap between technology and the business. Another area where construction and IT are vastly different is in contracts. If we take a look, this is the implementation of a project management information system. So on this project, we've got a contract between the owner and the software vendor. We've got a contract between the owner and the hardware vendor, and a contract between the owner and the implementation contractor. So a total of 3 contracts governing that whole project. And here's that hospital construction project you saw a photograph of earlier. There's the contracts. contract between the owner and the general contractor, the owner and the architect, the owner and the engineer, the owner and some service providers, and contracts between the general contractor, all their suppliers, and all their subcontractors. I looked at this and I thought I had all the agreements understood, and then somebody said to me, so, you know, under St. Joseph's Hospital, who owns the land? Right? Who owns the land? I thought, well, isn't it the hospital? I said, no, it's not the hospital. The land under St. Joseph's Hospital is owned by the Sisters of St. Joseph. Okay? So every legal agreement and that becomes an encumbrance to their property has to go through Mother Superior. Okay? Mother Superior's lawyer died halfway through the project. With all those contracts in place, it means there's going to be disagreements on who owes who what. And those disagreements are managed by claims. If both parties agree, then we simply go through change control. But if there's a disagreement, it goes through a claims process. And claims process is kind of considered to be routine in a lot of construction projects. That's the last phase of every project, claims resolution. Yeah, it's so routine. I was reading a report from one organization, and they said here, the company is engaged in various legal proceedings and claims that have arisen in the ordinary course of business. Okay? That's what they put in their annual report. These are things that they can expect in construction projects. Another area here is the regulatory constraints to consider on a construction project. Yeah, on the construction project, you've got the planning department of the city, you've got the Ontario Building Code, you've got the electrical code, you've got certifications of all your workers, all these regulatory constraints that we rarely see in IT-type projects. How about security and safeguards? What's security mean on a construction site? Put a fence around it and keep the bad guys out, right? What's security mean on an IT project? Put a virtual fence around your data and keep the bad guys out. Kind of similar, kind of different. One's about keeping people physically off the site, and the other one is about protecting your data so people don't get at it. Oh yeah, and the other safety item is in construction, all the worker safety items that you've got to consider. Doesn't hardly exist in the IT world. Let's take a look at the development life cycle. The Stacy complexity model tells you that depending on your level of uncertainty, whether it's the uncertainty in technology or uncertainty in your requirements or your scope, a low level of uncertainty means you can use a simple approach. As you go up the spectrum, you've got to have better communication systems in place and feedback systems in place. So in a simple world, we can use a sequential waterfall type model. This is, everybody says, oh yeah, that's what we do in construction, okay? As things get a little more complicated, we go to incremental releases. So in an incremental release, we would plan the whole thing, but then build or deploy in increments. As things get more complicated, we go into the iterative approach. In an iterative approach, you do a major plan, but then you hold off on the details of the plan until you get into the phase of the work. So you hold off making decisions until as late as possible. The idea here being trying to maybe maximize value, maximize benefit. And in the most complex environments, we'll move to a full agile approach. And the agile approach says we've got lots of good feedback and lots of good communications, and we are giving the team permission to adjust the scope of work as we enter each new iteration. Adjust the scope to maximize the benefit, maximize the value. So we may be adding scope, removing scope, or changing up the scope. So let's take a look at some real projects and how they go on, how they fit on this spectrum. We'll start with a simple project. Simple project. In this simple project, the constructor is building a duplex. This particular one, he kept it very simple. For $1.5 million, you could buy a duplex. You don't get any choice about your wood finishings, or your trim, your color paint, your countertops, or anything. He just builds it and he sells it. And he sells lots of them that way. Okay? He's keeping it real simple, using the sequential model. Simple waterfall approach, right? And he does that more than once, multiple times. So now he plans in detail, and then he builds Unit A, then he builds Unit B, then he builds Unit C, each time releasing one to the public, maximize the benefit, even getting some capital gains returns for himself on that one. So that one is the incremental model. Okay, let's look at that project management information system implementation I mentioned earlier. In this one here, we do a high-level plan. You say the high-level plan, we're going to start by giving them scheduling capability, and then we'll do costing and estimating capability later, and then we'll give them resource managing capability, and then we're going to enhance some of the reporting capabilities. So what we're doing is a high-level plan that says we'll do all these things, and we have to do all of them because they're in the contract, but we won't do the detailed planning until we enter into each phase. And for that one, we're using an iterative approach. We're doing the detailed planning as we enter into each phase, but we're doing the entire project as scoped out. No flexibility on the scope. Okay, take a look at this one. I wrote a report that identified some 100 deficiencies on a power plant. And they were safety deficiencies, and they were reliability deficiencies and performance deficiencies. And then we made a big plan, gave it to the team. The team could figure out the details of how they would work each iteration, and they did that as they entered into each iteration. So this is the iterative approach. You do a big plan, and then you plan the details as you enter into each iteration. Here's a construction project. In Florence, it was the Medici family who was funding a lot of this. You've heard of the Medici family? Okay, they wanted build a really big cathedral, something that would impress everybody. Okay, how big? Well, it kind of grew as time went on. The design continued to grow until they came up with a design for 30,000 people. And the original design said make it cruciform, that is a big T, and in the middle of the T there, put a really big dome, like the biggest dome in the world, okay? Okay, so they didn't have enough wood in all of Tuscany to build scaffolding that would support a dome from the ground all the way up. They had no capable lifting mechanisms. They hadn't designed anything that could lift stuff all the way up to the top. They started work in 1296. Over 100 years later, they started building the dome. Okay, what they're doing is figuring out as they go. Sound like agile method? Yeah. Agile method. They even had scrum teams at each level, each elevation with kitchens and canteens so people didn't have to run down to the bottom floor to eat. So trying to give them convenience. They implemented new safety rules. Okay, wider scaffolds where they could find enough wood for scaffolds. They built them wide. And they had another rule. If you're on a scaffold above a certain elevation, you don't drink wine that day. Okay. Oh, see that little ball at the top? They had to figure out how to put that little ball at the top. They had an apprentice engineer designer on the job. His name was Leonardo da Vinci. Figured out how to put a little ball on the top. One of his first jobs. So there's construction following an agile methodology. We always assume if construction follows waterfall methodologies. This is an agile one. How about this one? I think this is my last one. Software project. So in Washington, the General Accounting Office established some rules that said if defense contractors wanted to bid on projects, they had to present their proposals in the form of, they called it IMP-IMS. That is an integrated master plan and integrated master schedule that would draw directly from the contract details. So this organization I worked with came up with a methodology and a software that would take the information line by line out of the contract and move it into the integrated master plan, integrated master schedule format exactly the way the General Accounting Office demanded it to be. Okay, so that was sort of phase one. As soon as they had that, they looked at it and said, hey, you know, we could take little modules of this IMP-IMS plan and pull out all the best practices components and use them for replication. If we had to do this again, and we could scale them up for resources and time and schedule and money, and they built the software that would do that. Once they had that, they spawned a new idea. They said, hey, we could use all that replication and scheduling capability and create scenario charting, visual scenario charting. You know how most project management tools say, this is the one way you're going to do it, right? The WBS is the scope, and this is the one way you're going to do it. How do you get there? You want to try out a few scenarios. So they had project management planning teams that said, hey, we want to try out a whole bunch of scenarios. So could we just push a button and we branch off into a new scenario? Said, yeah, we can do software for that. Okay? And then once they did that, they even added risk drivers methodology so they could look at, do some decision analysis on all those various scenarios. So what we're looking at here is software development where the agile approach really works, because each time you build a product, you look at that product and say, hey, to maximize the benefit, we could add this new feature or function to this product. So there we go. Software development in the agile world. So what we have here is a spectrum of approaches depending on the uncertainty in the technology. Do we have the information? How do we know how to do it? And uncertainty in the scope and the requirements. Do we understand what the client wants, or can we figure out what the client needs as we go? So what have we looked at in the last few minutes? The risk breakdown structure, and I've brought you some of the challenges, showed you some of the challenges and how they're different between construction and IT. Yeah, project management is project management, but you got to understand the different challenges between all the different project types and customize your approach, customize what you're doing depending on the risk exposures on the project, on the uncertainties on the project, on the scope and the location of the project. We've looked at scope, environment, human resources, stakeholders, contracts, security safeguards, and life cycle. And that's about it. Questions? Who's my question runner? Diana.
I have a test one too.
Here it goes.
I have a question when dealing with, third-party construction providers, because I'm a PMP since 2005, and they say the 3-month hold in your project plan is none of your business because that's our contract, and they won't even give you milestones or deliverables. How do you handle that kind of thing?
Yeah, I deal with that right at the contract stage. I demand that the contractors provide a critical path schedule with milestones before we even go into the contract.
Thanks, Mike. I also work in construction, but I'm finding that IT is becoming a huge part of construction because building automation systems, security systems, all of the rest of it.
Yep.
And a lot of that stuff is being shipped offshore to be developed. So how, as a project manager, do you deal with both construction and IT, but also that diverse set of people?
Yeah, in construction on one site, we can easily manage by walking around, right? You walk around, you can see how big the hole is, you can see when the foundation is in, you can see how much steel is there. And as soon as we start talking about IT projects, there's a lot of intangibles. What I try to do is identify all the interim deliverables and monitor against the interim deliverables rather than waiting for final deliverables.
Sorry. So I don't know if there is a right answer for the question, but just your opinion. Having discussed all these differences between IT and construction projects, do you think a construction engineer can be a project manager on an IT project and vice versa, or because according to PMI standard, a project manager should run any project.
They've got to have the background. They've got to know the questions to ask. I've done it. I've worked in IT projects and construction projects and aerospace projects and nuclear projects. I went into a project and it was on a nuclear power plant automated shutdown system. I said, what do I know about this? And they said, Mike, look at these people you got. They were really powerful, trustworthy, good people. I kept them in constant communications and constant feedback, and I was able to manage that project.
We're a national builder, developer, operator. Yesterday we announced restructuring. We
as soon as you introduce any business process changes, you're going to get resistance to change. So this would be a good time to engage organizational change management consultants and help you through that. People will resist change. There's a normal process everybody follows through. You can't push them through it, but you can help manage the change.
Just out of curiosity, like, when you hear about construction projects, first thing you think of is delays. I just want to know what's your view on that. When you compare that to construction.
Comparing the differences in delays in construction projects, and do you get the same on IT projects? I don't know if there's a whole lot of difference in scheduling between one and the other. I've seen it all. Yeah, I think I'd have to throw that out to the field here. What are common causes of delays in construction? Anybody want to throw out an answer? Snow.
Different contractors, so you've got like an electrical contractor versus
Multiple contractors.
they've got their own resource and challenges, but there's a domino effect.
Domino effects, people getting in each other's way. It's a physical site, right? Security secrets, not wanting to share all the information.
No, CPIC checks. Security
Security checks. Oh, yes, yes. As soon as you start on a project, how do you get up to speed? If it's a secure environment, there can be significant delays when you start that whole project.
Waiting for responses to RFIs and change orders.
Yeah, the wait for responses and RFIs and change orders. And everybody in construction is aware of the new Ontario Construction Act, and that there are all kinds of schedule response requirements for invoicing and claims now. Okay, so there's a whole lot of new stuff on that new Ontario Construction Act as well. One.
Hey Mike, thank you for a great presentation. I'm curious about the agile adoption in the construction industry. Do you have a sense of what level it's at, for example, in Canada? And secondly, are there any kind of example of application a little bit more modern, or is it more like just like a concept at this point? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm the right one to answer that question. But what I do find is if you're talking integration of design and construction, then the agile world becomes quite appropriate. But when it comes to strict construction, I'm not even sure I have an answer for that one.
Great presentation. What are the top 3 skills you see as for construction project managers, and would they be any different than IT project?
Wow, there's a big question. Again, the first starting place is a real familiarity with the domain they're working in. Okay, whether it's IT or construction. And I'm going to go back to the construction in the construction world, physical sites management by walking around, which is totally different than you can do in most IT projects. Management by walking around is maybe management by communicating around, but you don't have that one physical site. So I'm going to stick with those two items, okay? Sherry?
So if you are in the process of introducing IT automation into the construction environment.
If.
That generally has a very manual mindset. What are the success triggers that you're going to use to sell that concept and get buy-in, speaking the language of the construction environment so that they feel comfortable about the change that you're introducing?
One of the keys that I find in introduction of project management information systems is that portfolio management component and the program management component. You know, to maximize the benefit of timing of deliveries and selection of the right projects and management of the resources. So, yeah, those are kind of executive level functions, but that's where the big benefit I see comes.